A faint light crept over the horizon, casting a soft glow across Ashland City Hospital's sterile facade. The quiet of dawn settled over the hospital's empty hallways, interrupted only by the low hum of fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of medical machinery. It was a peaceful start to what seemed like another routine day for Nurse Maria Cortez, who was stationed at the reception desk with her coffee still steaming. She was preparing to start her rounds, unaware that this morning would change her life, and many others, forever. As she scrolled through files from the previous night's shift, Maria heard footsteps echoing down the hall. Expecting a coworker or an early patient, she looked up, but her hand froze halfway to her coffee as she saw who had walked in. It was a young girl, barely 10 years old by the looks of her, with disheveled hair, wearing an oversized jacket and clutching something tightly in her arms. There, nestled in a faded pink blanket, lay an infant, no more than a few hours old. The girl's wide, tear-filled eyes looked pleadingly at Maria as she approached the reception desk, barely able to speak. Her expression was one of both fear and fierce determination. Maria's shock dissolved quickly as her instincts took over. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" she asked gently, leaning down to meet the girl's gaze. The girl clutched the baby closer to her chest and nodded slightly, though her eyes told a different story, one of exhaustion, pain, and fear. With a soft voice, the girl whispered, I was told to come here." Her voice trembled, her tiny hands white from gripping the bundle so tightly. Maria immediately called over her colleague, Nurse Sarah, who had just arrived. The two nurses exchanged concerned glances as Maria asked, "What's your name, sweetie?" "Emily," she replied softly, barely lifting her gaze from the baby. A small, hesitant smile flickered across Maria's face as she tried to calm the girl. "Emily, you're very brave for bringing your baby here. You're safe now. Can you tell me what happened?" Emily looked down at the infant in her arms, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Her lips trembled as she opened her mouth, but no words came out. It was as if the weight of the situation held her voice captive. Maria gently placed a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder, motioning for Sarah to fetch a stretcher. Emily was clearly exhausted, but her grip on the baby was steadfast. When the stretcher arrived, she hesitated, eyeing the medical staff with uncertainty. "You can keep him with you," Maria assured her, noting Emily's reluctance to let go of the baby. "We'll take care of both of you. You don't have to worry about a thing." The words seemed to bring a small measure of relief to Emily, who allowed herself to be gently guided onto the stretcher, the baby still cradled in her arms. As they moved down the hallway, Maria observed Emily's pained expressions, her small body tense with every step. Years of experience as a nurse told Maria that this wasn't a typical case. The girl's young age, the baby's fragile state, and the lingering distress in Emily's eyes all hinted at a more complex and troubling story. As they approached the examination room, Maria and Sarah exchanged a quick, silent agreement. They would need Dr. Jameson's help. Dr. Thomas Jameson was the senior pediatrician at the hospital, well known for his calm demeanor and compassionate care. He entered the room a few moments later, a look of surprise quickly masked by his professional calm. "Hello, Emily." He greeted her softly, taking a seat beside the bed. "I'm Dr. Jameson. We're going to make sure you and your baby are both all right." Emily looked at him, her gaze uncertain. Are you going to take him away?" "No, sweetheart," he said, glancing at Maria, who nodded in agreement. "The baby will stay with you. We're here to make sure you're both safe and healthy." For the first time since she'd arrived, Emily seemed to relax, albeit only slightly. As the medical team worked efficiently around her, they observed every small reaction, every flicker of emotion that crossed her face. They understood that whatever had brought this young girl here was something beyond her years, something no child should ever have to face. "Emily," Dr. Jameson began carefully, "is there someone we can call for you? Maybe a parent or guardian?" Emily shook her head almost immediately, a flicker of fear flashing in her eyes. "No, I don't want them to know. They'll be mad. The subtle exchange of glances among the hospital staff spoke volumes. Whatever Emily was afraid of, it was enough to keep her from wanting to reach out to anyone familiar. Dr. Jameson maintained his calm composure, although it was clear that her words troubled him. "That's all right, Emily," he said gently. "You're safe here with us. For now, we just want to make sure you're okay. You don't need to worry about anything else." Emily gave a slight nod, her gaze drifting back to the baby. Her trembling fingers brushed against the newborn's cheek as though seeking comfort in his tiny presence. Dr. Jameson motioned to Maria, who approached with a reassuring smile. "Would it be okay if we examine the baby for a moment, Emily?" she asked softly. "I'll be right here with you the entire time." Emily hesitated, her arms instinctively tightening around the baby. But after a few seconds, she nodded, reluctantly allowing Maria to take the infant into her arms. The baby stirred slightly, his tiny hand reaching out, but he remained peacefully asleep. Maria's heart swelled as she gazed down at the newborn. He was small, far smaller than most newborns she had seen, with soft, fragile features that hinted at his vulnerable condition. Dr. Jameson's face softened as he observed Maria with the baby, but his eyes remained filled with concern. "Let's make sure he's doing okay, Maria," he said quietly, directing her to the nearby examination table. Meanwhile, Sarah stayed with Emily, offering her a gentle smile. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Emily shrugged, glancing down at her hands. It hurts a lot." Sarah's gaze flicked toward Dr. Jameson, her mind piecing together the fragments of Emily's story. Whatever had happened, it had left Emily with more than just physical pain. There was a weight of sorrow and confusion in her voice that hinted at something far deeper. After a brief examination, Dr. Jameson turned back to Emily, his expression thoughtful. "The baby is in stable condition, which is very good news. We'll run a few more tests just to make sure everything is okay." Emily's relief was palpable as she reached for her baby, her hands visibly shaking. Maria returned the baby to her arms, noting the way Emily clung to him, as if afraid he might disappear. It was clear that this child and her newborn shared a unique, unbreakable bond despite the unimaginable circumstances that had brought them together. "Emily," Dr. Jameson spoke gently, taking a seat beside her again. "I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I need you to be honest with me. Is that okay?" She nodded slowly, though her gaze remained fixed on the baby in her arms. "Do you know how you got here today?" he asked. Emily bit her lip, as if struggling to remember. I walked. It wasn't far. A lady saw me and told me to come here." Dr. Jameson's brow furrowed. This story was getting more complex with every answer. "Do you know how the baby came to be with you?" She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I woke up and he was there. It hurt a lot. I was so scared." Her voice trembled as she looked up at Maria, her young eyes brimming with tears. "You didn't do anything wrong, Emily," Maria assured her softly, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We're here to help you, okay?" At that moment, Dr. Jameson stood, signaling to Maria with a serious expression. "We need to bring in social services," he murmured, his voice low. "This is a very delicate situation, and we'll need all the support we can get." Maria nodded, her heart heavy. She would stay by Emily's side, providing whatever comfort she could as they navigated the challenges ahead. The reality of what lay before them was daunting, yet there was no question in her mind about what needed to be done. This girl and her baby needed safety, care, and support. They needed to feel the warmth of compassion in a world that had been anything but kind to them. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting a warm glow through the hospital windows, Maria, Dr. Jameson, and Sarah silently vowed to stand by Emily and her baby, to give them a fighting chance at a life filled with safety and love. Unbeknownst to Emily, she had already inspired a powerful resolve in the hearts of the people around her, a resolve that would guide them through the difficult journey ahead. Emily was escorted gently down the corridor by Nurse Maria, her tiny steps mirroring her reluctance. As she clung to the newborn, she glanced nervously around, still visibly frightened despite the comforting words of the hospital staff. Maria led her into a private examination room, hoping to shield Emily and her baby from the curious eyes of the bustling hospital staff. Just before she closed the door, Dr. Jameson entered, his expression a blend of calm professionalism and profound concern. "Emily," Dr. Jameson said, his voice warm and steady, "we're going to take good care of you and your baby. You've done an incredibly brave thing by coming here today." Emily's eyes darted between him and the infant in her arms, as if unsure of what to say. After a moment, she simply nodded. Dr. Jameson sat down beside her, keeping his tone as gentle as possible. "Is it all right if we take a closer look at you? I'd like to make sure you're completely healthy too. You've been through a lot, haven't you?" Emily looked down, her small fingers running across the baby's cheek. It hurts sometimes," she whispered. "I didn't know it would hurt this much." The simple words, said in such a childlike voice, tore at Maria's heart. She had seen many difficult cases over her years in nursing, but this was unlike anything she had encountered. Gently, Maria took Emily's hand. "I know it's been hard, Emily, but right now, all you need to do is rest. We'll handle everything else, okay?" Emily nodded, seeming to gain some reassurance from the kindness in Maria's eyes. Dr. Jameson motioned to another nurse, Nurse Sarah, who had joined them with a clipboard, preparing to take notes. Sarah smiled softly at Emily and then at the baby, her expression a mixture of awe and sadness. Dr. Jameson began his preliminary questions with care, mindful of Emily's tender age. "Emily, can you tell me how long you've had this pain?" She shifted uncomfortably, her face a mixture of confusion and shame. It's been a while," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I didn't tell anyone. I was scared." Maria exchanged a silent glance with Dr. Jameson, both of them processing the implications of Emily's words. They had been trained to remain composed, but the reality of the situation was harrowing. A child as young as Emily should never have experienced such pain or fear. At that moment, Sarah interrupted with a soft cough, her voice low and reassuring. "Emily, sweetie, while Dr. Jameson asks a few more questions, would it be okay if I held your baby for just a little while? Just so you can rest your arms." Emily hesitated, her grip instinctively tightening around the infant. Her fear of losing him was palpable, even though she was only a child herself. You're not taking him away, are you?" she asked, her voice quivering. "No, honey," Maria replied gently, her voice firm yet kind. "He'll stay with you the whole time. We're just here to help you both feel better, and if you want him back at any time, just let us know. All right?" After a moment, Emily released her hold, allowing Sarah to carefully cradle the baby in her arms. The newborn stirred slightly but settled quickly, his tiny fingers curling against Sarah's chest. Emily watched intently, her expression a blend of protectiveness and relief, as if momentarily freed from the physical strain. As Dr. Jameson continued his assessment, he carefully documented Emily's responses, mindful of the emotional toll it took on her. It was clear that the story she had to share was far more complex and painful than anyone could have anticipated. At one point, he asked gently, "Emily, has anyone ever hurt you or made you feel uncomfortable?" A deep silence filled the room as Emily's gaze dropped to the floor. Her lips parted slightly as if to answer, but she quickly closed her mouth, biting down hard. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. The emotional wall she had built around herself was formidable, even at her young age. Dr. Jameson gave her a few moments, not pushing, allowing her to find her words in her own time. After a long pause, she whispered, I wasn't allowed to tell." Her words were so soft that Sarah, standing nearby, had to strain to hear them. Nurse Maria, sensing the urgency of the situation, gently placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "Emily, sweetheart, I know it's scary, but no one here is going to be angry or hurt you. You're safe now." A single tear slipped down Emily's cheek. Her gaze flickered toward the baby in Sarah's arms, and her expression softened as though she were drawing strength from his presence. "I didn't want him to come. I didn't understand. And it hurt. A lot." Maria squeezed her shoulder, fighting back tears of her own. "You did nothing wrong, Emily. You're so strong to come here. We're here to help you both, all right?" Emily's tiny frame shook with a silent sob, but she nodded. She was clearly overwhelmed, struggling to process her emotions while still protective of her baby. In that moment, her vulnerability and courage were profoundly clear, and the room filled with a renewed resolve among the hospital staff to do everything they could for her. Just then, a knock on the door broke the silence, and a woman in her 40s entered, her expression kind but serious. She introduced herself as Ms. Benson, a social worker assigned to Emily's case. "Hello, Emily," she greeted her warmly. "I'm here to help make sure you and your baby are safe and have everything you need." Emily's eyes, wide and unsure, met Ms. Benson's, and she glanced at Maria and Dr. Jameson as if seeking reassurance. Maria nodded, squeezing her hand again. "Ms. Benson is here to help Emily, just like we are." The social worker sat down beside Emily, maintaining a respectful distance to help her feel at ease. "Emily, is there anything you'd like to tell me about what's happened? I promise, no one here will be angry with you." Emily's gaze shifted down, and she fidgeted with the sleeve of her oversized jacket. "I don't want to go back," she murmured. "I don't want them to be mad at me." The gravity of her words hit everyone in the room, especially Ms. Benson, who took a deep breath and nodded with understanding. "You don't have to go anywhere you're not comfortable with, Emily. Right now, all we're focused on is making sure you and your baby are okay." Dr. Jameson leaned forward, his expression compassionate but firm. "We're going to do some tests, Emily, just to make sure you're both healthy. I'll be here with you, and so will Maria if you'd like." Emily nodded, her face pale but resolute. She kept glancing at the baby, who was now resting peacefully in Sarah's arms. He's so little," she whispered, her voice filled with a mix of wonder and fear. "I didn't know he'd be this little." Ms. Benson placed a gentle hand on Emily's knee. "You've been very brave, Emily. Taking care of him and bringing him here shows just how strong you are. But you don't have to do it all alone anymore." A soft, tentative smile broke through Emily's somber expression as she reached out to touch the baby's hand. Her fingers brushed his tiny fist, and for a moment, the fear and pain in her eyes seemed to ease, replaced by a tentative glimmer of hope. It was a fragile moment of connection, a reminder of the love and resilience that still flickered within her, despite everything she had endured. As the medical team prepared for the next steps, Ms. Benson rose, her voice firm as she addressed Dr. Jameson. "We'll need to bring in law enforcement, given the details Emily has shared. But I'll be here throughout to make sure it's handled delicately. Emily's well-being is our priority." Dr. Jameson nodded, exchanging a knowing glance with Maria and Sarah. "We'll make sure she feels supported at every step." Ms. Benson turned back to Emily, her expression softening. "Emily, sweetheart, if at any point you feel uncomfortable or need a break, just let us know, all right? You're in control here." Emily nodded, holding the baby close again as Sarah gently passed him back into her arms. The two of them, girl and baby, looked as if they were each other's world. Maria's heart swelled with a mixture of sorrow and admiration. Emily's journey to this point had clearly been harrowing, yet her protective instincts for her newborn were undeniable. As the team left the room to finalize plans, Maria stayed by Emily's side, watching as the young girl's gaze softened every time she looked at her baby. Whatever challenges lay ahead, One thing was certain. Emily would never be alone in facing them again. The staff at Ashland City Hospital, from doctors to nurses to social workers, had made an unspoken vow to shield and support her. The day was only beginning, and though Emily's path forward was uncertain, she now had a community of protectors who would fight tirelessly to give her and her child the safety, healing, and love they both deserved. In that sterile hospital room, under the watchful care of strangers turned allies, Emily and her baby had taken their first steps toward a new future. By late morning, the quiet hum of Ashland City Hospital had transformed into a flurry of activity. Word of Emily's arrival had spread among the staff, drawing silent support and curious glances from every corner. Each nurse, doctor, and orderly who passed by the private room offered a nod or a soft smile, a gesture of encouragement that reflected the collective hope within the hospital walls. Though few understood the details of her situation, the sight of a young girl holding her newborn baby had deeply affected everyone. Inside the room, Nurse Maria stayed close, guiding Emily through the small steps of caring for her baby. Emily, though clearly exhausted, absorbed every instruction with a fierce concentration. Her eyes rarely left the baby's face, as if reassuring herself that he was real, that he was safe. Watching her, Maria couldn't help but feel both admiration and sorrow for this brave child, whose life had shifted so drastically. Around midday, Ms. Benson, the social worker, returned with a team of individuals carrying clipboards, files, and solemn expressions. Detective Michael Hayes, a middle-aged man with gentle eyes and a calm demeanor, introduced himself to Emily with a warm smile. He knelt to her eye level, his voice steady but soft. "Hi, Emily," he greeted her gently. "I'm Detective Hayes. I know today has been overwhelming, but I'd like to ask you a few questions, if that's all right. You don't need to answer anything that makes you uncomfortable, and you can stop at any time. We're just here to help you and your baby." Emily nodded slowly, her hand instinctively tightening around her baby as if seeking comfort from his tiny presence. Her gaze shifted between Detective Hayes and Ms. Benson, who gave her a reassuring nod. "Emily," Ms. Benson said softly, "we're here to listen to anything you want to tell us. You've already been so brave, and now it's our job to make sure you're safe." Detective Hayes maintained a calm and steady expression, watching Emily carefully to ensure she felt no pressure. "Do you feel okay talking to me, Emily? We want to understand what happened so we can help." Emily's lips trembled, but after a deep breath, she nodded. With careful questions, Detective Hayes began piecing together her story. Each question was asked gently, every answer treated with the utmost respect. Emily's responses were brief and often hesitant, her voice barely a whisper as she recounted fragments of her life, especially her home life, a place filled with fear and uncertainty. As she described her mother and stepfather, the atmosphere in the room grew heavy. Ms. Benson's expression softened with sympathy, and Maria struggled to keep her emotions hidden. Emily's words painted a stark picture of a young girl forced to grow up too fast, burdened by responsibilities no child should bear. Detective Hayes, maintaining his calm composure, gently asked, "Emily, can you tell me a little more about the baby? Do you know how he came to be with you?" Emily's gaze dropped to the baby in her arms, her fingers brushing over his soft cheek as if reassuring herself of his presence. A pained look crossed her face, and she hesitated, her eyes welling up with tears. I woke up, and he was there. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. It hurt a lot." Her quiet words cut through the room like a knife. Everyone present, the social worker, the detective, and the nurses, exchanged knowing glances. Though Emily hadn't explicitly stated what had happened, the gravity of her situation was unmistakable. Detective Hayes took a steadying breath, his face masked with professional control as he continued. "It's all right, Emily. You did nothing wrong. You did exactly what you should have by coming here. He leaned back slightly, giving her some space. Do you know the baby's name? Emily looked down at her baby, her lips curling into a faint, tentative smile. I thought I'd call him Oliver, like in the storybook we had at home. A soft, collective sigh of relief passed through the room. It was the first sign of hope they had seen in Emily's words, a glimmer of the childlike wonder she had never had the chance to fully experience. Maria placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, smiling. Oliver is a beautiful name. Emily's face brightened slightly, though it was tinged with the sadness of a child who had seen too much, too soon. Do you think he'll be okay? She whispered, her voice laced with worry. I don't want him to hurt. Ms. Benson's voice softened as she spoke. Oliver is in good hands, Emily. We'll make sure he's well cared for, and we'll take care of you too. Detective Hayes cleared his throat gently, his gaze focused and warm. Emily, I know you've been through a lot, but I want you to know that we're here to help you and to keep you safe. Your stepfather won't be able to hurt you anymore. Emily's shoulders relaxed and she nodded, though her expression was cautious. The fear ingrained in her eyes spoke of a trauma that would take time to heal. But for the first time, it seemed as though she was beginning to believe in the possibility of safety. As the initial interview concluded, Detective Hayes stood up, giving her one last encouraging smile. We'll talk more soon, but for now, just rest. You're safe here. He and Ms. Benson stepped out to speak privately in the hallway. Maria stayed behind, sensing that Emily needed the reassuring presence of someone familiar. She pulled up a chair beside Emily, who was looking down at Oliver, tracing his tiny fingers with her own. After a moment of silence, Maria spoke softly. You're doing such a wonderful job with Oliver, Emily. I can tell he's in good hands with you. Emily's gaze shifted up to meet Maria's, her expression filled with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. I didn't know I'd love him this much. I want him to be happy. Maria's heart ached for this young girl who had been forced into motherhood long before she was ready. She reached out, giving Emily's hand a gentle squeeze. You're doing everything right, Emily, and you're not alone anymore. We're all here to make sure both of you are okay. Emily nodded, her small shoulders relaxing as the weight of her fear eased, if only slightly. Just then, a knock on the door interrupted the quiet moment, and Ms. Benson re-entered, her expression kind but serious. Behind her stood a woman with a warm smile and compassionate eyes. Emily, this is Mrs. Harper, Ms. Benson introduced. She's a foster parent who might be able to help take care of you and Oliver if you'd like. Mrs. Harper stepped forward, her demeanor calm and welcoming. Hi, Emily. I've heard so much about you and your little Oliver. I know this is a lot to take in, but I'd love to get to know you and see if we can help each other. Emily looked at Mrs. Harper with uncertainty, instinctively pulling Oliver closer. Maria leaned in, her voice soft. Mrs. Harper is here to make sure you're safe and happy, Emily. She wants to help you and Oliver, but it's up to you to decide if you feel comfortable. Mrs. Harper knelt to Emily's level, her voice gentle and filled with understanding. If you'd like, Emily, I could visit you over the next few days. We could talk, and you can tell me about yourself. I'd love to hear all about Oliver, too. Emily's guarded expression softened slightly, her eyes searching Mrs. Harper's face for reassurance. After a moment, she nodded. Okay, I guess we could talk, she whispered, her voice tentative. Mrs. Harper's smile broadened. I'd love that, Emily. And if there's anything you need or anything you want to ask, you just let me know. The adults in the room exchanged relieved glances, sensing that Emily was opening up to the possibility of a new life, one filled with safety and compassion. Ms. Benson touched Emily's shoulder, her voice warm. We're all here for you, Emily. Whatever you need, we'll make sure it's taken care of. As the day wore on, Emily spent time with Mrs. Harper, who brought small toys for Oliver and a children's book for Emily. She spoke to Emily about her home, a place filled with soft colors, a garden with blooming flowers, and rooms that felt warm and welcoming. For the first time, Emily's guarded expressions began to soften as she imagined a life outside the walls of fear she had known. When the visit ended, Mrs. Harper gave Emily a small wave, promising to return the next day. Emily watched her go, her expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. Maria sat beside her as the evening drew near, her presence a comforting anchor in Emily's storm of emotions. "Do you think I could be a good mom to Oliver?" Emily asked, her voice a whisper. Maria's gaze softened as she nodded. "I think you already are, Emily. You're doing everything you can to protect him, and that's what makes you a great mom." Emily's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at Oliver, her fingers brushing over his tiny hand. The burden she had carried for so long seemed lighter now, with people by her side who cared, who believed in her, and who would fight for her and her baby's future. The sky outside turned shades of orange and pink as the sun set, casting a warm glow over the hospital. Inside the quiet room, Emily, with Maria beside her, finally let herself believe in the possibility of a better life, one where she and Oliver would be safe, cherished, and given the chance to heal. The next few days at Ashland City Hospital unfolded slowly for Emily and her newborn Oliver. Each morning, Mrs. Harper returned, as promised, her warm demeanor and gentle conversation gradually easing Emily's anxieties. Together, they discussed everything from books to flowers to what it would be like to have a safe, stable place to live. Mrs. Harper spoke to Emily as an equal, never pushing her, instead letting her open up naturally. Day by day, Emily's guarded walls began to soften, and a shy bond formed between them. The hospital room had become a second home for Emily, with her baby crib beside her bed and toys and small gifts collected around the room from hospital staff. Nurses took turns visiting her, their shifts providing moments of comfort as they taught Emily small caregiving tasks, changing diapers, bottle feeding, and even soothing Oliver back to sleep when he was fussy. Maria remained by her side as much as possible, providing unwavering support and the warmth of familiarity. One afternoon, as she gently rocked Oliver in her arms, Emily asked Maria, "Do you think I'll be able to keep him with me? I mean, forever?" The question lingered in the air, heavy with the uncertainty Emily had lived with her entire life. Maria sat beside her, choosing her words carefully. "Emily, what I can promise you is this. We're going to do everything possible to make sure that you and Oliver are safe, no matter where you go or what you decide. Mrs. Harper and her family are there to support you both. And as you get stronger, you'll be able to be with him as much as possible." Emily listened intently, her gaze fixed on Oliver, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I don't want to be apart from him," she murmured. "He's all I have." Maria's heart ached at the young girl's words, the innocence of her plea echoing in the room. "I know, sweetheart," Maria whispered, resting a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We're going to make sure you both get the love and support you need. And remember, Oliver is lucky to have you. The bond you have is something no one can take away." Later that day, Ms. Benson entered the room, her face marked with a kind but serious expression. She took a seat next to Emily, her voice soft as she began to speak. "Emily, I want to let you know that we've contacted your mother, and she's aware of where you are. She hasn't come to see you yet, but we want to make sure you feel safe, okay?" A flicker of fear crossed Emily's face, but she quickly hid it, hugging Oliver closer. Will I have to go back?" Ms. Benson shook her head gently. "No, Emily. You won't have to go back to any place that doesn't feel safe to you. Right now, our priority is your safety and well-being, and we're exploring all options. We want you to feel comfortable and cared for, and Mrs. Harper has offered her home for you and Oliver to stay in as long as you'd like." Emily's eyes widened at the offer, and a hint of relief passed over her face. "So, I don't have to go back?" she whispered. Ms. Benson reached out, placing a hand on Emily's. No, you don't. But we're here to help you through this, whatever you decide. Later that evening, Mrs. Harper returned for another visit, this time carrying a small photo album. She sat beside Emily and opened the album, revealing photos of her home. A cozy living room with a big, plush couch, a sunlit kitchen, and a small bedroom decorated with soft blues and greens, intended just for Emily and Oliver if they chose to come. Mrs. Harper explained the home's details with a smile, pointing out her favorite cozy corner and mentioning the bookshelves filled with stories she thought Emily might enjoy. Emily listened carefully, nodding occasionally, as if weighing each word. At one point, she looked down at Oliver and then back at Mrs. Harper. Would he have his own crib? Mrs. Harper nodded warmly. Absolutely. We'd have everything you need, and you'd be there with him every step of the way. And Emily? She added gently, you'll always be his mother. We're just here to give you both a safe place to grow. Emily bit her lip, her gaze shifting between the photographs and her sleeping baby. A glimmer of hope crossed her face, mingling with her hesitation. For the first time, the idea of a stable home seemed within reach, a place where she could heal, where Oliver could grow, where they would both be protected. On the 5th day, Emily agreed to visit Mrs. Harper's home, a tentative step that signaled her trust in the people around her. Maria, Ms. Benson, and Mrs. Harper accompanied her, ensuring that she felt secure every moment of the journey. When they arrived, the small house immediately felt warm and inviting, filled with soft colors and gentle light streaming through the windows. Mrs. Harper showed Emily to her room, complete with a crib, a rocking chair, and shelves stacked with picture books. Emily walked around slowly, taking in each detail. Her fingers brushed over the soft blankets in the crib, and she stood quietly in front of the bookshelf, letting her eyes scan the spines of the books. For a moment, she simply held Oliver close, his gentle breaths in sync with hers, as if they were both processing the beginning of a new chapter. That evening, Mrs. Harper prepared a simple dinner, inviting Emily to join her at the kitchen table. As they ate together, Ms. Benson spoke about options for Emily's schooling and support programs that could help her build a stable future for herself and her baby. Emily listened carefully, her cautious gaze occasionally meeting Mrs. Harper's encouraging smile. The idea of returning to school, learning new things, and having a safe environment for Oliver to grow up in stirred a quiet excitement in her. Before the night ended, Mrs. Harper gently asked, Emily, would you like to stay here tonight? You and Oliver can take some time to get comfortable, and if there's anything you need, I'm just a room away. Emily hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly around Oliver's blanket, but after a moment, she nodded. I think I'd like that, she whispered. Her eyes met Mrs. Harper's, a small flicker of trust sparking in her gaze. The days turned into weeks, and Emily slowly settled into her new life with Mrs. Harper. She continued to bond with Oliver, her maternal instincts growing stronger each day. Mrs. Harper helped her with basic parenting skills, and together they built a routine that allowed Emily to regain a sense of stability. With time, Emily's guarded nature softened, and a new resilience emerged. She enrolled in a small local school with Ms. Benson's assistance, while Mrs. Harper provided guidance, support, and endless patience. Oliver thrived, his tiny coos and giggles filling the house with a warmth that lifted Emily's spirits. Emily's journey was far from over. Therapy sessions helped her navigate the trauma she had endured, and though some days were harder than others, she now had a foundation of trust and support. Mrs. Harper, true to her word, remained a steady, caring presence, encouraging Emily to embrace both her own healing and her role as Oliver's mother. One evening, as the sun set over the small house, Emily sat on the back porch with Mrs. Harper, watching Oliver crawl across the soft blanket on the grass. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, and the gentle warmth of the evening sun bathed the yard in golden light. I didn't know things could feel like this, Emily said softly, a hint of wonder in her voice. Like, safe. Mrs. Harper looked at her, her eyes warm and gentle. You've created this, Emily. By choosing to be strong, by loving Oliver so deeply, and by trusting yourself. This is your safe place now. Emily glanced at Oliver, who was happily playing with a soft toy on the blanket, his bright eyes catching the last rays of sunlight. A sense of peace settled over her, a peace she had never known but had always longed for. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that her past did not have to define her future. That night, after Oliver had fallen asleep, Emily sat by his crib, watching him breathe in the quiet stillness. She reached out, gently brushing his soft cheek, a tear slipping down her face. A tear of relief, of hope, of newfound strength. She understood that her life with Oliver would hold its own set of challenges, but she was ready to face them. Emily had found her family, not one bound by blood but by love, resilience, and the kindness of strangers who had become her pillars. In that quiet, peaceful moment, she whispered softly to her sleeping son, "We're going to be okay, Oliver. I promise." And as the stars filled the night sky over the little house, Emily's journey, once marked by pain and fear, began a new chapter, a chapter of healing, hope, and a future filled with love.